Well, welcome to yet another informative, educational, and entertaining podcast episode here at The Wealthy Ironworker. Now, today's podcast episode, we are going to be talking about the benefits of being a union member. In fact, that's what the podcast episode is called, the benefits of being a union member. Now, there's two caveats I want to kind of lay the groundwork for and set some expectations as you listen to this podcast. Number one, when we say union member, what we are actually referring to, at least in this podcast episode, are those in the skilled trades. So your iron workers, your millwrights, your pipe fitters, your electricians, etc. Those are the individuals that go out on a day-to-day basis and build and maintain America. Those individuals, from a union perspective, that's who we're talking about. And number two, this podcast episode isn't meant to cover every single benefit that every single skilled tradesman and women enjoy across the country. Rather, what we did was take some of the commonality benefits, your wages, your health insurance, etc., and let's lump those things together and try and cover as many people as possible in this podcast episode. And we feel like we've done a good job. So come on in the studio. Let's have a discussion about being a union member and the benefits that are associated with it. All right, everybody. On today's podcast episode number 9, I believe it is. I want to go over, the title of today's podcast is going to be the benefits of a union member. This is going to be based on one of the articles on the website. And if you want to, you can go on over there and you can check it out. You can also, when you do, you go over there and you'll see all the various links because I try and rely on a fair amount of good information. And on that note, one of the things you'll notice is that typically speaking, I'll have a small notepad about yay size. And I just use it for scribbling purposes. I just need talking points, when I'm sitting here. Those of you who have listened to the podcast before have heard that, and I just kind of run through some things. Today's podcast is going to be a little different, primarily because what I did was I printed out the entire article. So it's on full-size sheets, and I highlighted the very things that I wanted to make sure I didn't miss. There are specific talking points that I feel are definitely worth covering word for word, especially when they come from other people and entities for that matter. So whether it be the Department of Labor or I think it's the National State Legislator Group, etc. So that's of one specific difference. The second thing is you may detect by the sound of my voice that it sounds a little different. I'm a little under the weather. I got a little bit of a head cold. I've had a little bit of drainage today as I've been driving back and forth to various appointments and whatnot. And so give me a little bit of grace as we go through this. And I promise you the podcast episode is going to give you a number of things to think about, do some research and whatnot. So when we start talking about the benefits of being a union member, the first one that comes to mind for the vast majority of people is, okay, well, I'm going to make more money. And that certainly seems to be the case. I have talked to literally hundreds of people by this point, and all of them have this preconceived thought process and notion that, okay, well, if I'm going to be a union member, then I'm going to make more money. As a matter of fact, that this is going to be a separate podcast episode, but there is such a thing as the representation gap. If, for example, you were to make it just as a matter of signing a card and people could choose whether or not they wanted to be a union member, the representation gap is millions, meaning millions would, if the barriers that were instituted were removed, you'd see a large spike in being union membership. Additionally, the unionism in general, when you look at the approval rating, I want to say right now it's like at 72%. It hasn't had this level of approval in decades. And that's for multiple reasons for another podcast. But the reason I bring that up is because there are a lot of people who have this idea that, okay, well, if I become a union member, I'm going to get paid more. They certainly understand this. And when we go to the article and the information contained therein, we start to read things like the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that, quote, non-union workers earn just 85% of what unionized workers earn. That's $1,029 a week versus $1,216 a week, end quote. And so they're taking an average across the country, and they're just going to they're bringing all this data in, and they're saying, okay, well, 85%. That's the figure they put out. The Guardian reports that the difference in pay is 10.2%, and they reference a report, excuse me, quote, by the Joint Economic Committee of Congress and the House Education and Labor Committee. Unionized workers are also 18.3% more likely to receive employer-sponsored health insurance, and employers pay 77.4% more per hour worked toward the cost of health insurance for unionized workers compared with non-unionized workers, end quote. Now, we will get into the insurance piece next because it actually is the next point, but it's something worth talking about and bringing up. Now, as far as the Guardian concerned, the pay difference is 10.2%. And NPR reports that over the course of a lifetime, the difference between union and non-union is an astounding 1.3 million. Now, that's the benefits included. So we're going to bring everything into the fold, and we're going to have a look at this. Much the same way that the statistics kind of take into account, okay, well, everybody, regardless of field, let's see what they've compared somebody who graduates high school versus someone who hasn't, and vice versa. Same kind of comparison, taking a massive amount of data. We're going to bring it, collect it in, and we're going to evaluate it, and we're going to see where we come up with it. Now, all that to say, and I don't even have this wasn't even in my notes. John F. Kennedy was talking about it from an economic perspective back during his tenure, about how a rising tide lifts all boats and how non-union workers certainly benefit from union wages. That's true. And this is especially true in the skilled trade shortage we've got. If companies are very forward-thinking and cognizant about the difficulty and the level with which they're going to have for probably at least a decade, then they would want to rethink a lot of how they do business, how they basically pay and their benefit structure, et cetera, to attract top talent. And one of the things that I think is probably going to be an easy catch-all for a lot of companies and institutions, for that matter, is probably going to be, let's have a conversation about what it looks like to be a union. There's a tremendous number of benefit structure, as well as individuals who are willing to help you out in much of what you're going to be partaking in. So when it ultimately, though, comes down to it, when we start talking about the benefits of being a union member, wages are often talked about first, and for good reason. Now, number two is going to be health insurance. And that's also for a reason. According to Statista, and again, you can go over to the website and click on the link, at least 30 million workers do not have some form of health insurance. Now, that's according to Statista. My own personal belief is that it's higher than that. And I think it's higher than that for two reasons. I think that, number one, it's higher than that because there are companies out there who are actually exploiting people who are here in the country illegally. And I know that if they're exploiting them illegally, the likelihood that they're paying them health insurance is probably next to none. Those are the people who view anybody working, especially those who are here illegally. They go, well, this person is someone that I can significantly exploit as a tool in a toolbox. And when that tool is dull, I'll toss them off to the side. And then what I will do then is get me another tool. And this is unfortunate, but that's reason number one, I believe that this figure is a little bit low. Number two, I think this figure is a little low because of what is called misclassification. Now, misclassification takes a number of forms, but I think the one that's the most egregious is when companies in general, what they will do is they'll tell their employees, hey, well, where you want to be is your own company. And so I'm going to give you a 1099, if you will. And where this is exploitation is that they're putting all the burden of everything on them. And newsflash, if you work for that company or just that company and their friends, their buddies, chances are you're probably being exploited because they're passing all of the burden, everything, taxes and everything, onto you instead. And so because of those two things that come together, I believe that number is more than 30 million. Nonetheless, we'll run under the assumption, at least from this perspective, that Statista says it's 30 plus million. Now, why is health insurance, and it's been in the news fairly largely, especially probably the past, 5-6 years, something to that effect. There's numerous reasons why, but one of them that I want to touch on, okay, is the fact that we as Americans in general seem to be having declining health. Certainly seems to be the case when I talk to a bunch of other people that I know. And it was the catalyst for me when I sit here and think about, okay, well, at the beginning of the year, what I wanted to do was prioritize my own health. And if I'm going to sit here and work myself, and this is the dilemma faced by multiple people out in the field, then your health is probably taking a back seat. And the reason why it's so important is because of medical bankruptcy. Bankruptcy in general is a problem, but medical bankruptcy is a significant problem. And the reason why, it's because Investopedia has the first two reasons for bankruptcy as loss of income and then medical, following right behind that. The American Bankruptcy Institute has it at number 1. CNBC reports a staggering 66.5%, or 2/3, of all bankruptcies are attributed to medical debt. And Debt Hammer has a really innovative website where you can see a lot of information about bankruptcies, where they also say medical debt is the leading cause. And all of these have, hyperlinks in the article where you can go over there, click on them, follow up, and see where, what it is that we're using to put out this, not just article, but the podcast episode in general. And what's more, Patrick Bett, who is also the owner of Valuetainment, and he's gotten a PBD podcast, and he seems to be a voice that a lot of people want to talk to and listen. He reports that 72% of those bankruptcies, so 2/3 of all bankruptcies, are attributable to medical debt. 2/3. And out of all of the medical bankruptcies, 72% of them are from people who actually had health insurance. Meaning, I have health insurance, and then I have to claim bankruptcy because of a multitude of things that take place. And the health insurance that I have is not significant enough. When you have declining health, that certainly seems to be the case. Now, I know that there's going to be some young people who are listening to this, and there's going to be talking points from people who would dismiss the importance of health insurance and would say things like, well, all that young people need is catastrophic insurance. Maybe, but maybe not. This is especially true when you look at when you look at the significant rise in autoimmune diseases. And this seems to be particularly something that a lot of younger people are prone to. I've done some OSHA classes in the past, and I would be talking to high school students, and they were in the trades, and we would be having conversations. And I would ask a question. I would throw up one, and I'd say, how many of you have had heat exhaustion before? And I was floored that at least half of the individuals in the classroom said, I've had heat exhaustion before. Well, if those of you who have been in the field any time at all know that once you've had heat exhaustion, the likelihood that you're going to get it again increases. And that threshold decreases. You're wearing your body out, if you will. And so between that and then you start talking to some of the old timers who are warning you, look, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. Be more thoughtful about how you're approaching the job, what you're doing, etc. And they're trying to be warning because you're young, you think you're indestructible, and someone says you don't need insurance, you need catastrophic insurance. Well, what about, all of the things that I just mentioned, in addition to the fact that let's be honest here, you may have a family to support. And insurance is super important. And the idea, to me anyway, that 72% of all medical bankruptcies originate from people who actually have medical insurance is a pretty alarming thing to me. And so when I'm, doing my research and having conversations with people and those that, I would talk to, and I'd say, tell me about your insurance, tell me about your retirement, tell me about your wages, etc. And there were numerous individuals who were very, very pleased, young and old, with the insurance they had. This is especially true when you begin to establish yourself and a family. And the last thing that you wanted, because I remember having a very eye-opening conversation to me with a guy who was in the trades and how he was unable to afford medical insurance for his family. And he said they had some difficulties and whatnot. And of course, they had some kids. And he and his wife were when they found out, because they became union, he became a union member. And he found out that he was going to have health insurance. He was so pleased and happy. I've never seen somebody like that. It was amazing to see. The last thing you want to find yourself, is within a company that doesn't provide, and then you got to sit here and scramble. Far better that you start off on the right foot, and that's an additional benefit that you get by being a union member. It's really good insurance. Now, I cannot prioritize it enough. This is especially true as you get older and you have a family to take care of. Don't fall for the lie that you don't need it or that you just need catastrophic insurance. It's not something that I would particularly pay attention to, okay? Well, let's go to point number 3 now, which is going to be focused on retirement. Now, as young people, most young people do not think about retirement. I've heard 2 different thought schools on this. They say, okay, well, it's a long time off. And this is what people who don't want you to focus on retirement will say. You got many years to save, so don't worry about it. Just make the money in your pocket. Don't worry about it, because it's more work on employers to provide retirement plans. And the second one actually comes from young people themselves, where they'll say something to the effect of, well, I may not even live that long anyway. Do you know how many people who have said that and have lived longer than what they thought, and then they didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of? Social Security was never meant to be as big of a retirement chunk for people as it is today. It's amazing. Now, according to Penny Hoarder, a staggering 58 million Americans have no retirement at all. That's pretty substantive as far as I'm concerned. And that certainly is applicable to those in the trades. Now, the reality is the reason why, where the rubber meets the road when it comes to retirement. The reason why retirement is so important is that when you are that age and you go to retire, it's a dichotomy of choices. You are either going to be a drain on the economy, where resources for the collective good, however you want to allocate them, at some point, somehow, some way, end up taking care of you to some degree because you were not, didn't do your due diligence or whatever, or you are a contributor to the economy. It's one or the other. You're buying goods and services. You are actively participating as a retiree, but you're still actively participating and you're not taking away resources. And the government knows this too. They intuitively know this. This is why they look at bills like the Secure Act 2.0, which is designed to give companies greater access to retirement plans and then automatically get people to invest when you get hired on for the 401k aspect. Fun fact about the 401k, it's about 40-some years old now. I saw a video just the other day where the creator was being interviewed, and he specifically said the 401k was never meant to be the retirement behemoth that it has become into. It's a supplemental retirement. That was the initial reason to start it. Now, most Americans, when you kind of get down into it, right? Most Americans have a reduced financial education system. Fortune reports that 57% of Americans cannot put their hands on $1,000 for emergency services. And if you can't put your hands on $1,000 for emergency services, about 60% of them live paycheck to paycheck, then you probably are not engaged in retirement saving as well. This is a benefit that you get by being a union member. Not only that, but you also get a defined benefit, which is a pension plan. That's what Social Security is, by the way. And you get a defined contribution plan, which is the annuity for many of you in the trades. Again, there'll be podcast episodes later on that specifically outline what a defined benefit plan is, what a defined contribution is, what those plans look like. And I can't cover everything, but I can try and to be a catch-all to catch as much as possible. But you get to have retirement incomes that are already negotiated into the plans that you're a part of. Now, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, reports that 85% of union workers participated in retirement plans, whereas only 51% of non-union did. Now, this is, again, taking everybody in consideration and not just the skilled trades, but everybody that I'm aware of that's in the trades is covered by a retirement plan, sometimes defined benefit and defined contribution, depends on where you're at. And I want to leave you with this last nugget before we move on to our next point. I have never met someone who said they wish they would have saved less for retirement. Every single person that I have ever talked to in my career and in my life has always lamented not saving more. That includes those of you who are covered by collective bargaining agreements, because you could be saving via IRA and whatnot, which is another podcast for another day. Okay. But I've never met someone who said they wish they hadn't saved as much as they did. Now, point number 4, greater job site safety. This is a pretty important one. Unions were and still are, as a matter of fact, the tip of the spear when it comes to greater job site safety. They are the ones who are responsible for OSHA and the advocacy and things of this nature. And for those of you who may be listening and you might be coming right out of the gate and you might say something to the effect of, well, OSHA slows me down, rules, regulations, whatever. I want to start in this particular segment with this right here out the gate. Safety is a very reactionary thing. And because that's the case, every safety rule is written in blood. Be glad that it's not yours. Every single one. Be glad that it's not yours. Now, the Department of Labor mentions how union contractors were 19% less likely to have citations and had 34% fewer citations overall when compared to their non-union counterparts. That's certainly the data indicates then that union job sites and union companies in general seem to place more emphasis and have more to do with job site safety. This makes sense. And then the occupational and environmental medicine. Now, I love this particular statistic because I think it really bears out. There's a couple things I want to really highlight before I read it. Number 1, this is not union advocacy. They are studying data. That's it. So the occupational and environmental medicine, you can go to the website, click on the hyperlink and check it. I think you have to have a subscription, but that's what you can do. Simply looking at the data found, and I quote, 1% decline in unionization attributable to right to work is a 5% increase in the rate of occupational fatalities. In total, right to work laws have led to a 14.2% increase in occupational mortality through decreased unionization, end quote. This is not a firm that is partisan. This is occupational environmental medicine here. That's pretty alarming as far as I'm concerned. And when we couple that with the Department of Labor indicating that union firms are more likely than to have less citations and less safety infractions, that clearly tells those of you have greater job site safety. Now, routinely, I teach OSHA classes, and it used to be back in 1970, before the OSH Act was enacted, it was 38. 38 people, on average, 38 people died a day. Now we are down to about 13 to 14 a day. I would much prefer to be one of those individuals who goes home at the end of the day and looks exactly and sounds exactly and feels exactly like I did before I went to work than to be one of the 14 as a statistical number. So the data seems to indicate then, of course, that you are going to have greater job site safety. Point number 5, collective bargaining agreements and the greater protection that you get by being covered under a collective bargaining agreement. Now, there will be another podcast episode down the line about what a collective bargaining agreement actually is, but suffice it to say that it is simply a contract. That's what it is. The two variational differences that a CBA has than from the normal contracts that most people are used to is this. The first variation is that contracts are typically between you, the one person, whereas under a collective bargaining agreement, you're going to have maybe 1,000 pipe fitters or 1,000 electricians or whatever it happens to cover, however many members there are. And the second variation is that usually on the other side of the contract, from the trade's perspective, again, you have one individual. Maybe it's the mortgage company, maybe it's the rental company, maybe it's the cell phone lease company, whatever. And in this instance, it's multiple contractors who are on the other side of the contract. Now, contracts in general provide some firm. They provide some firmness to the interaction between employer and employee or those engaged in that contract. All right. Now, there are people who will tell you, bar none, that why would you want to actively pursue a contract, a collective bargain agreement? They will tell you this. And the reason why they will tell you this is because you have labor law protections. And the primary one that is usually discussed is at-will employment. Now, let me tell you about at-will employment for a second. At-will employment is not the great protector that you and everybody else espouses it to be. And rather than take my words for it, I will let the National Conference of State Legislatures describe at-will employment. Quote, at-will means that an employer can terminate an employee at any time for any reason, except for an illegal one, or for no reason without incurring legal liability. That's your race, your sex, your gender, etc. Likewise, an employee is free to leave a job at any time for any or no reason with no adverse legal consequences. Sounds pretty above the bar at this point, but they continue. Quote, at will also means that an employer can change the terms of the employment relationship with no notice and no consequences. For example, an employer can alter wages, terminate benefits, or reduce paid time off. In its unadulterated form, the U.S. at-will rule leaves employees vulnerable to arbitrary and sudden dismissal, a limited or on-call work schedule depending on the employer's needs, and unannounced cuts in pay and benefits. This is not, again, a union advocacy group. This is the National Conference of State Legislatures describing at-will employment. Do you know what combats at-will employment or at least provides additional protection for you, the individual? A contract. A contract that specifically spells out what I'm getting paid, what my benefits are, what are my work hours, etc. That is what a collective bargaining agreement does. It is a contract between the employers that employ you and you, the union member. So let's not for nothing, let's look at what the Society for Human Resource Management. Well, this is the association that human resource departments are actually, this is what they join. This is how they describe collective bargaining agreements. Quote, a collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, is a written legal contract between an employer and a union representing the employees. The CBA is the result of an extensive negotiation process between the parties regarding topics such as wages, hours, and terms and conditions of employment. It protects you. That's what the CBA does. It spells out line item for line item the relationship between you, the employee or the union member, and the contractor or contractors who's employing you. That's it. Why would you not want to be covered and be protected by a collective bargaining agreement? That's what those in the union are going to tell you. And it certainly makes sense, especially because at-will employment, or from a legal ramification perspective, you have no legal recourse. And on the opposite side, I have actually heard of, and this was in the medical community, but there were people in the medical community because of the shortage. Because of the shortage. This was, I think, nurses and doctors. They would go to work for healthcare firms. And the healthcare firms would, when you come to work for them, they'd say, okay, here's a contract. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to make you, I'm going to pay you, blah, 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 blah. But also, if you leave me, you have to give me 4 months notice, or there's a fine/penalty for you to pay. Here is an employer that understands the benefit of contracts for them. And with the looming continual shortage of skilled trades, around 500,000 now, in about 10 years, projected to be about 2 to 3 million. Is it not possible to conceive that companies may try and get you, when you come to work for them, to sign a contract that you're going to stay with them, and if you're going to leave them, you're going to give them a month's notice or whatever? It's not that difficult for me to conceive that. And they're trying to combat, obviously people leaving at will under the legal protection, right? Because it leaves them high and dry and it does nothing for them. My recommendation then is to seriously consider what a CBA does and how it offers the protections for you when you are a union member. Now, the next point that we're going to talk about is greater access to training. And greater access to training for union members comes in what I would say are 2 different avenues. You have the standard, the gold standard. That's been the standard for decades now. It's called Registered Apprenticeship Programs, or RAPs. And then you have what is called Journeyman Upgrade Training. Now, registered apprenticeship programs are covered by the Department of Labor and the DOL via apprenticeship.gov explains them like this, quote, registered apprenticeship is an industry-driven, high-quality career pathway where employers can develop and prepare their future workforce, and individuals can obtain paid work experience, receive progressive wage increases, classroom instruction, and a portable, nationally recognized credential. Registered apprenticeships are industry vetted and approved and validated by the United States Department of Labor or a state apprenticeship agency, end quote. Now, with the skilled trade shortage that the industry is facing and is looking at increasing in a decade, we don't need less registered apprenticeship programs. We need more. We need more robust training. With the technology that we're bringing in, we definitely need more. And so from a registered apprenticeship program, employees, especially starting out, you younger individuals who might be listening to this podcast and are interested, you can go over to the contact page on the website, thewealthyironworker.com, fill it in, and it will send me an email, and I can converse with you, talk with you, and get you connected to the right individuals, the right trades, etc. Now, the second flavor that training takes is journeyman upgrade training. Now, journeyman upgrade training is either A, contractor driven, or B, member driven. And what I mean by that is, if you are a contractor and you are looking at work that falls on the outside of what you normally do, or you need to renew some safety credentials or renew some rigging credentials, or you need to renew some first aid or whatever, renew some welding certs, etc. What you effectively get then is contractor driven training. You go in, you talk to the apprenticeship committee, the training committee, and you tell them your needs. And because the members there are your employees, it's to their benefit to obviously craft the training and find and fill the holes necessary. Now, the other flavor that it takes is member driven. There are differing locals in different facets, and they may have welding training, they may have OSHA training, they may have rigging training, whatever it turns out to be. Maybe you want to go on a specific job and you need to upgrade some kind of cert. That means it's member driven. But unions in general invest in an enormous amount of training. And whether it's through the registered apprenticeship program that you actually come up through and you get paid, you are paid while you're going through this training. You're not paying. So let me make sure that's very clear for you, because there are a lot of young people who are actively looking for other avenues, and what they're finding is that they're going to go and pay some technical school, or maybe even at a community college level. And I'm here to tell you, if you're listening to this podcast or you know somebody who could benefit from this information, then share it with them, because going through a registered apprenticeship program, they're going to get paid. They're not paying, they're going to get paid to go through the program. And for those of you who are journeymen and want to renew your certs and have more tools in your tool bag or toolbox to go to work, Journeyman Upgrade Training. And the last thing that I want to talk about from a union perspective is going to be a robust networking opportunity. Now, what that ultimately looks like is the network of the various local unions across the country. This could be electricians, pipe fitters, iron workers, millwrights, crane operators, etc. Many of them have a network of job lines. We put out on the job line when somebody needs to go to work, and you can sit here and call, find out information, find out the particulars of the job, how long it's going to last, etc. And you have basically somebody helping you do job searches all the time, whether it's at the local union level or it's the vast network that you have when it comes to the international and across, let's see, America, and then of course Canada. And that covers the top 6. Again, there are multiple additional benefits that you get. It might be geographical, it could be regional, it could be where you're at and the industry that you're serving. There are multiple additional benefits that you can get, but we can't cover every single one. We can cover the majority of the benefits. We can turn them into an educational and informative podcast for you to take home and consume, and then go to the contact page, fill it out. I will get you connected with where you need to go. And there you have it. I want to say thank you for all of the people who have been reading the website, sharing and listening to the podcast, and supporting everything that we got going on in general. Please share this podcast out as you see appropriate, and I will see you on the next one.